Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott, and excited to be back here again, and with another new guest, Dave Oppedisano. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ray. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here, and you and I have been talking for a few weeks here, and we finally were able to get something here on the schedule. I've been really excited since we've met to learn more about your layout and your story. We met at NERPM up in Springfield, and you gave a presentation up there that was really interesting on your BNSF Lakeside Subdivision layout. And after that, we chatted, and I was looking forward to getting you here on the show and learning about the Lakeside Sub and sharing it with everybody else.
Well, it's great to be here, and it's great to have met you back at the show. And that's the one thing great about the meet is you get to meet people and make long-time friends.
Absolutely. It was a very good meet. I unfortunately could only make it for that one day. I had to work the Friday, but the Saturday was really good. And I'm really glad my friend Mark Herrick, who's also a BNSF modeler, kind of pulled me into that one. I mean, once he saw BNSF, I knew he would be there and brought me in. And you gave an excellent presentation on your layout. And we'll talk quite a bit about what you had discussed in that. But I want to really start in the beginning for Dave, and what got you into the hobby of model railroading?
I think my story is pretty similar to everybody else. You see trains as a kid. It started with me when I was about 7. Went over a cousin's house, and he had HO scale layouts set up on the floor, and the rest is history. So it just grew from that point on.
So was the model railroading that first pulled you in, or was it the prototype?
The model.
The modeling.
We lived in the city at the time in New York, so the only thing we got to really see were elevated subways, but seeing actual models was actually a pretty neat thing for a kid.
And then from there, as you're growing and whatnot, I'm sure you kind of went in that in out phases as most people do. What in your adulthood really brought you into the model railroading hobby?
Well, I followed all through college. Minimally involved, always keeping track of models, reading the magazines. And it wasn't until maybe 20 years ago I actually started building something where I'd kind of settled down a little bit where I could actually build a little layout, whether a little module or something along those lines. I was in the military, so I had moved around a bunch, so it wasn't really practical to build anything large. But I always kept involved building models and modules and so forth.
Were the modules kind of built just to kind of build the model building side of things, or was it to satisfy an operating thing, or was it kind of both? Or
I think a little bit of both. I remember working on, if you remember back in the day, David Barrow had a South Plains district module set out of model railroader. I built that.
Okay.
Got it partially completed, and then kind of moved on from there to some other interests. I actually got to meet David at one point and got to see his layout, the last iteration of the Cat Mountain Santa Fe before it became the Lubbock Industrial District there. And that really impressed me when I saw that live.
Yeah. So what was your big takeaways from that as you now are building your own layout? What was your big takeaways from Dave's layout? Well,
one thing I really liked about it was just West Texas open plains. You kind of got the feeling you were out west in the middle of nowhere, big time railroads, big engines, big trains.
Right.
And got to experience it in person at one point, and, the rest is history. Just you catch the bug, and, it's unlike any railroad back east. When you get out west, it's pretty big time.
Yeah, certainly is. I mean, I've only had a little bit of a taste of it being down in, just outside of Fort Worth, and then seeing trains that are heading to Amarillo and out that way, and just the size of them and that. And I can only imagine what it looks like when you get farther west and into even more no man's land and seeing that.
So initially, my thoughts were to build something along the BNSF main line, Curtis Hill in Oklahoma, something hooking up to the Panhandle in Amarillo. If you look at a map, BNSF crisscrosses in Amarillo,
right.
North, south, and east, and west. It's kind of the crossroads of the railroad. And I've always loved the area, but it's just too massive to really model a major terminal like that. But
yeah, so So you go from there, and that was really you, as you were talking about, that was really your kind of your first ideas to do that that area, and then you got turned on to the BNSF Lakeside Sub. What really lit that fire?
Well, I was originally going to model the Wichita Falls subdivision, which goes from Wichita Falls, Texas to Amarillo.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty long subdivision just in terms of total mileage. So I was finding it difficult to model, to compress it. And also, as you get further west towards Amarillo, the industries were dropping off. Mm-hmm. And I was on a trip in California. I was at the California State Railroad Museum, and in the gift shop, they had a video playing, one of the 7 Idea Productions video. And the video was called East of Spokane. And I had traveled to Spokane a number of times, did some rail fanning, and the video was all about the Lakeside Sub. And the one thing that attracted me to was a relatively short sub. It's only about 130 miles or so. And so you can compact a lot into it. One portion of the subdivision, the Union Pacific and Canadian Pacific come down and run through together. So there's a lot of traffic, intermodal, there's chemical, there's coal. You name it, it goes through.
Sure. So
pretty interesting place to be. And again, the scenery out there is pretty spectacular if you ever get to see it live. So
we're in a lobby of a museum. We see a video, and it just that one, and I think you've definitely shared the video with me. It wasn't an overly long video. It was very well done, but it was kind of a, what was it, 4, 5, 6 minutes, unless that was just a trailer that you had sent me. But
that was a trailer I sent you. The video's about an hour and a half long.
Okay, so good. So you had at least an hour and a half exposure to the Lakeside Sub, and now these ideas are starting to flow, and you've got this idea. Let's talk a little bit about the research part of it, because now you're turned on, you've got this video you've watched and whatnot. Where do you take it from there? Like you've kind of got this maybe track plan that's starting to draw itself in your head, but what were kind of some of the steps going into it to research it?
Well, I need to get a hold of the BNSF track charts, number one. So I went over to my friend Ramon Rhodes, and he has pretty good access to information, BNSF-wise. So he sent me the track plans. I have another buddy of mine that's actually an engineer on the BNSF, and I was able to get some other information off of him. So I had a pretty good idea about how the line was operated. I'd been to Spokane several times and rail fan just the eastern portion of the sub, but it did take one trip out west to really see the whole thing. So I think it was October, about 4 years ago. And my good buddy Butch Eiler, I called him up on a Sunday, said, "Hey, we're going to Spokane tomorrow." He says, "Okay, let's go." So we jumped on a plane and went.
Nice.
And spent a few days out there running around. It was a lot of fun.
Right. I can imagine.
Good to have a good travel buddy who's ready to go.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, we everybody needs one, a good rail fanning buddy, and a guy that really knows how to rail fan and be patient and wait for trains and knows what they're doing is certainly a good thing to have for sure.
So we had a good time. We spent a day on the sub between Spokane and Pasco, and then continued a little further east out of Spokane towards a place called Hauser Yard and up towards Sandpoint, which is the junction between the high and low line coming out of Montana. So really, really beautiful area. If you ever get a chance to go up there, I'd recommend it.
Well, I hope I have a rail fan buddy in Mark Herrick someday for him and I to get out there. He's been out there plenty of times because he's modeling the High Line, and I'm hoping to get him on the show. He's going out this summer to do some rail fanning and some further research for his layout, and we'll have him on and talk to him, and I hope to get out there someday and get to see that portion of it as well. So yeah, you go out, you've got this idea of the Lakeside Sub. You talk about some of the things that turns you on about the Lakeside Sub. When you see it, what starts to go through your mind? Like, it's still you got to do some compression. So in your head, you must be building this checklist of, what do I need to include on a layout? What can I disclude? What are like the key pieces that you had to have from the Lakeside Sub to really sell it on a layout?
I think it goes to my first town to model is the town of Connell, which is it's about 40 miles northeast of Pasco. I knew Pasco would be out just due to the size. It's a major terminal yard, so Pasco would be represented in staging.
Sure.
Connell's a major interchange with the Columbia River Basin Railroad, and they have a daily train they interchange. And as you continue east, as you saw in my presentation, there's some very interesting scenery, as well as major crossings of the old Milwaukee Road, as well as some ex-Northern Pacific lines that are now short lines at Cheney and Marshall. So a lot of interchange with 3 separate branch lines along the route. That's what attracted me most to the railroad. So rather than having to build all the towns, you could just build the interchanges and move as many cars.
Right. So that's got to be part in your head. So you're, partial, the scenery, the areas, the industries, the interchanges that, the things
right.
that you're, the things that you're listing are kind of like these checkbox things. Of the scenery things, what like stuck out to you as like, the one that was the absolute must have scenery area on the Lakeside Sub that you're including now in your current layout?
Marshall would be one of the main areas. Marshall Canyon. It's just outside of Spokane. It's beautiful. It's kind of like a forested, pine forest kind of area. It's pretty diverse. Out of Spokane, a lot of pine trees, and as you go further south and west, it becomes more arid, just rolling hills and rolling grass, which to itself is pretty when you get out there. You got to really see it to appreciate it.
How about the structures? Because I know that was part of your thing as well. I mean, I remember seeing these big grain elevators that you had in your presentation. That must have also been one of those things that you put on your list.
Yes. The elevator Cheney at Connell.
Yeah.
It's no longer rail served, but for a prototype, if you need some industries, you can always add them. So There are definitely, every town out there is going to have a grain elevator, one sort or another. Some of them are rail served, some of them are not.
Right.
But the diversity is there, and the ability to serve the industries. So,
and I remember from your presentation this massive bridge. Tell us about that. Was that at Lind? Am I remembering this correctly?
Well, there was 2. There was the former Milwaukee Road Bridge at Lind.
Okay.
That crossed the route. The route was originally a Northern Pacific line, now BNSF, but the Milwaukee Road crossed there at one point, and the pylons and the abutments for the bridge are still there. Okay. So at one point we were thinking about trying to 3D print the abutments. I've got all the plans for them. It's a matter of can we pull it off, in the space. There's a space on the layout for it, but it's going to take a little bit of compression and to make it look right. There's also another bridge outside of Spokane, Later Creek, which is a massive structure. And we have a spot for that as well. That's not yet constructed, that part of the layout.
Okay, yeah, so I actually pulled up your presentation here just to refresh my mind. So, yeah, the Milwaukee Road Viaduct, I remember showing some older pictures of that. And that's a really neat structure to fly over that Milwaukee Road line. And, boy, they definitely had enough clearance there. Was the ground contoured for it, or did they build up around it to get over the Milwaukee Road at that bridge? Well, the BNSF went underneath it, and the Milwaukee Road went over the top of Northern Pacific. The Northern Pacific was there first. Yeah, They were there first. What's really neat about that area, if you ever travel around, the Milwaukee Road, they just picked up and left. It's pretty amazing, but everything is still there. Yeah, for the most part, the right of way and major structures are all pretty much in place. Now, there were 2 bridge abutments on the Milwaukee Road there. One of them they demoed a few years back to put a second main line in, but the other pylons are still in place. Okay, yeah, now I remember you telling us that. Yeah, so it flew over the top of it. The bridge is gone, but the piling's still there. Still definitely a neat spot and some ghost railroading if you go out there to see it. And that can always be fun on a rail trip to see where things used to be. Yeah, it's really evident from the air when you look at aerial shots, satellite views. You can see it right away. It sticks out like a sore thumb. Yeah, in your presentation, you show it like, there's so many grain elevators out there, and you had this picture at Cheney, and what stuck out to me was the old Burlington Northern trailer that was in the picture, along with this facility with the old depot there. It. Yeah. Yeah. So then they've got these short lines, the Eastern Washington Gateway Railroad and NIWX. Yes. So is that something that you're planning on including on your layout as well, that interchange railroad? I think so. I think we're definitely going to interchange there just for the diverse power that they have up there. And if you look at your presentation, they had all kinds of different units, from tunnel motors to old Conrail engines and so forth. So I think we'll definitely represent it, at least with some interchange tracks. And the grain elevator complex there.
but other than the actual line itself, I don't really have a good way to represent that. There's just not enough room. We start putting everything together.
And then there's these beautiful shots that you shared with Marshall Canyon. Tell us again about that, because I remember you were telling me a bit about, and I think that you said there may have been a third line there at some point.
There was 3 lines that went out of Spokane. It was the originally, Northern Pacific and Union Pacific and Spokane, Portland, and Seattle. So those are the middle line. I think the middle track there was SP&S, and now it's a bicycle trail.
Sure.
That's those pictures are from. Just a great line. When the BN got a hold of the Northern Pacific, they also got a hold of the SP&S, and they abandoned the SP&S line just due to the fact there was no customers alongside of it. It was in terms of grade, it was a lower grade route going down towards Pasco, but they abandoned it. It's a beautiful route if you ever see pictures of it.
And this shot right here showing what looks like one coming into the frame, and then as you look to the right of the frame, you can see the lower track is significantly lower and away from that upper track, and it looks like something potentially going away from it. So some pretty neat rail fanning. What happens is a great spot.
Yeah, what happens is in the canyon there, the tracks. There's one track that goes to the one side and one goes to the other, and they all connect at the bridge. So the BNSF typically runs up, I guess you'd call it the east side of that canyon, and goes up towards a side called Empire, and then joins the line at a place called Sunset Junction, just prior to the Later Creek Bridge. If you come up the west side of the valley, you actually have to come across the bridge to enter Spokane.
Yeah, let's talk about Spokane, because I think that was the bridge that was in my mind. This really long, high bridge that you have in Spokane. And what was the name of it again? You were saying
that's the Later Creek Bridge.
Tell us about that, guys. I think, do you have plans on including that on your layout?
I think so. I have a spot picked out about 9 feet in length for that bridge to go.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing, or the biggest challenge, is going to be making the pylons, because they're kind of tapered on both sides.
Sure.
So I had one gentleman who said he could 3D print them. We'll see. Again, that's on the next phase of construction, which was hopefully going to kick off this fall. It's kind of going phases.
And you shared,
in terms of bench work and so forth.
Absolutely. You shared a video during that of in your presentation of a train going over that bridge, and it was just wildly impressive how long that bridge was. And you can see Spokane in the background. You can see kind of downtown areas in this image and then the train going over that very long bridge, very high bridge. Definitely be interesting to see if you get that fully included and how you represent it, because there'll be definitely a nice piece on your layout for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a signature scene, but it still needs to be built.
and I'm sure you're contemplating the challenges, like you said, getting pilings made and whatnot. Have you ventured into that at all with any, as far as building bridges or adding any of that to any layout, either current or prior?
No, nothing like that. But that's part of the fun, right? Figuring it out.
Sure. I mean, it's funny how I know, at least for myself, you look at something and then it goes from the stages of there's no way I can do that to, well, even if I thought about doing it, I would probably have to, and then eventually you get yourself into it, and as you kind of push yourself along, and the beauty of the hobby right now is there's so much information right available at our fingertips that finding it isn't too hard. It's just executing. Exactly.
Well, one thing nice about it would single track a good section of the layout, which would slow things down. No matter how big of a layout you have, you're always trying to slow things down.
Right.
Kind of savor the experience a little bit as you go across the line.
Oh, I think that absolutely hits on it. And, seeing that, whether you were going to do that Wichita Falls subdivision, which I'm familiar with because I've been out on the Wichita Falls subdivision. And that was kind of one of the things. I'm standing there as I had a train, and they had come and sat in this spot when basically it was double tracked. It was like holding, and they were waiting for traffic to pass. And I was like, this is operations right here. I was like, this, I know, obviously, right? It's the real train out there on the rail. This is operations, but I was thinking in HO scale terms, like, yeah, okay. So you bring a train in and you hold them there, and then traffic passes, you slow the whole operation down, but you make it real. It's like, this is, I don't even know how to describe it. It was just kind of funny. It was like, this is what the railroad does, and this is what we try to emulate right here. It's not just all 50 miles an hour all the time. They're pulling into places, they're holding, they're letting traffic clear up, they're, prioritizing. So definitely neat things to include on a layout.
Yeah, that's one thing with the Lakeside Sub. It's not fully double track. There are a lot of single track sections still, and it makes it exciting, to kind of set up meets and so forth.
Absolutely. And then, so this last slide here, and then you get into your bench work where we're talking about Hauser, and I'm familiar with Hauser and Mark Herrick's interpretation of Hauser. What's your interpretation of Hauser going to look like?
Hauser to me looks like just big open staging, and it's kind of a yard in the middle of the woods out there east of Spokane. A pretty interesting place. I think we're going to represent the east side of the layout with Hauser Yard. So I don't know if we're going to be visible staging or put it back in a staging room. It depends how Spokane itself shakes out as we start building it. But again, that's the next phase.
So what do you have in your mind for operations? Now you talked about these areas, and we're going from, basically from Spokane to Hauser on the Lakeside Sub. I got this right so far, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're going to represent Hauser all the way down to Pasco or Connell, which is Pasco via Connell. Okay.
So as you got the locations in mind, now what are you envisioning for traffic? What are you kind of putting together in your head? Is what's this flow that you're starting to build?
Well, I guess we're just going to emulate the BNSF on the main line there. They run about 100 plus trains a day out in that direction. Mm-hmm. We probably won't do that many, but there are also locals that run out of Spokane and out of Pasco. There's a Connell turn. There's something called the Lynn turn. So the trains coming out of Pasco go up to Connell and interface with the Columbia River Basin. And then trains coming out of Spokane go south towards Lynn and interchange with the locals there as well. So there'll be local traffic as well as a lot of mainline traffic, all under the CTC signaling.
Excellent. What other, before your layout, what other exposure did you have to operations that really got you into it?
I'd operated on a few layouts in the past, just very minor, nothing major, nothing consistent. Just visited a lot of layouts along the way, but nothing as a regular operator. More of an observer, just kind of visitor.
Sure. You talked about David Barrow's layout and its influence on you. Were there other layouts that really had an impact on you as well?
I think his was the primary from early on. Lately, if you're familiar with Neil Schofield's layout, it's a Canadian Pacific layout. It's up there in New England.
Sure.
Just a piece of art. It really is.
Absolutely.
Again, Mike Confalo, another one up in the New England area. Great modeler. Just some fantastic modelers. In terms of club layouts, I think biggest influence would have been La Mesa, the Tehachapi layout in San Diego.
Sure.
Again, it's an incredible work of art.
Yeah, I've heard many great things about that. They say that's a bucket list layout to see, and
it is.
Yeah. So
if you ever get out there, try to run because it'll take you an hour to cross the layout when you actually run. It's just amazing.
That's absolutely amazing. What phase is the BNSF Lakeside Sub? Your layout. What phase would you say that your layout's in right now?
Well, we're finishing up phase 2. Phase 1 was a large peninsula. It was about a 60-foot long J-shaped peninsula. It's freestanding, double-sided. That was phase 1. Phase 2 is staging right now that we're finishing up. We've got a staging room and a back room that's set up for about 10 staging tracks right now, which may go to 20 on a second level. Then stage 3 will be the extension along the perimeter of the room. You saw it in the video or in the slides there. We've got another, probably about at least 80 feet of main line to extend as of right now.
Yeah, I'm looking at back at the presentation where you're sharing the picture of this very nice room. Is this the finished basement of your home, or? It
is, yes.
Yeah.
The basement was finished for the layout. I know you'll talk to a lot of folks. They won't build a layout inside a finished room, but I disagree with that altogether, because I want the room to be a place where I want to go down to.
Sure.
Because the layout's a big enough project as it is. I don't want to have to think about finishing the room after the layout is done.
No, I think so. Yeah, you've definitely done it in the right order, because I can tell you personally, I haven't done that, and there was some reasons for that. But boy, I'm thinking about, oh man, I got to move the layout out away from the wall. I got to get behind it. I got to finish the wall. So yeah, finishing that room, at least in my opinion, and it certainly seems to be yours, that get that finishing done first before you start putting that layout up.
People always worry about carpet, but if you're just careful with drop cloths and so forth, you can do a lot of work.
Sure.
And not damage anything.
Absolutely.
So, as long as you're careful, you can do it.
So you got this really sharp finished basement, and then I'm going through these slides. You show a little bit about your thing, and then I want to ask you about your bench work, because you seem to do something at least unique to me. It almost looks like it reminds me of like an engineered lamb beam. What are you using there for your bench work? Because boy, that looks like you could put an engine block up on that layout and it would hold it.
Well, you can. Those are eye joists that are typically used in home construction.
Sure.
And the reason I went with the eye joists is they're straight and they won't warp. I mean, every piece of wood you buy will warp. So the layout is the main frame of the layout is built with eye joists throughout. All the rest of the wood is all furniture grade 3/4 inch plywood. There's no dimensional lumber on the layout at all. I'll take it back. There are a few 7-inch blocks that are used just for kind of wooden gussets to take big screws and so forth. But it's all primarily I-beam and furniture grade plywood. And that's just for stability. We're in Pennsylvania, so we do have humidity changes. So that's one thing I was trying to remove from the equation.
Sure. And taking a look here. So one of the things you talked about in your presentation was the bendable plywood and making your corners. Why don't you talk on that a little bit, because it was really interesting to hear your material choices and the reasons why you picked them and what you were trying to accomplish with your backdrop.
Well, the backdrop, just like everything else I was trying to build in stability. So the backdrop the frame is made of a 3/4 inch plywood with masonite over the top. I really hate masonite. I really do. It's just one of those necessary evils. But the corners bending it was kind of a pain. So I found a product called bendable plywood. It's about just under an 1/8 inch thick. So it molds pretty well in terms of thickness with the masonite. And the one thing nice about it is, let's say you're going to do an inside corner, you could put the masonite up the straight pieces and just figure out what radius you would like, cut it, and then snap it into place. It'll just snap in between the two pieces of masonite. And again, all of it's glued up. Again, I use a lot of construction glue just to avoid having to go back and do the work over again and fill nail holes, because masonite doesn't clean up very well at all if you tap a hole in it with a nail gun or something along those lines. So the bendable plywood worked really well. Worked really well for inside corners, outside corners as well. Just put some temporary screws in until the glue's set, and then pull them, and you're good to go. And then if you have an inside S corner, the same thing applies. You can put a temporary screw or two in and then remove it, and it makes a really nice curved corner. It's a nice product. Like I said, it'll bend in for an inside corner, outside corner, or even an S curve. It's very versatile. It flexes, so if there's any movement on your backdrops in terms of expansion or contraction, it'll move, and it has some give to it. And not only that, but it's real easy to mud to get a nice seam with the masonite. That's another nice thing.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. And speaking of backdrop, so I noticed one thing, and I know you talked about it in your presentation, that backdrop in one section, so you got this straight wall, and then it kind of just gives us a little bit of a kick on an angle. And you did that for a reason. Why do we see a backdrop on an angle here?
That was a view drop right at the end of the peninsula there. If you're standing at the end of the peninsula, that Later Creek Bridge is going to be right about there, one end of it. So I wanted people, because if you allow people to camp out on the end of the peninsula, they're going to sit there and watch your trains on both sides as it comes all the way up and around. Again, that climb is pretty long. It's somewhere in the area of 30 feet long. Right. As it climbs up the hill there. So I wanted people to commit to one side or another. So I put that little kink in there. It's a 22 degree or 22 and a half degree bend. And the only reason I did 22 and a half degrees, that was one of the stops on my chop saw. So it provides a little bit of a view block, and it makes people commit to one side or the other on a peninsula. But not only that, but it adds a little bit of structural integrity to the long peninsula backdrop as well.
Sure.
So that was the reason for that, but it works out pretty well. I kind of like it.
Absolutely. So you got, so I see in here, and as far as the update, when you had this going, you have some track lead in Connell.
Yes.
And then
we have track running right now all the way from Pasco Staging all the way to Cheney right now. Cheney is where the track is ended right now, and just waiting for more bench work and track to go up. As we spoke about earlier, track has been a problem getting microengineered track.
Yeah, the challenge of pretty much getting anything right now, and there are certain things that are even harder, and you were talking about that, but you recently scored a little bit more to help keep you going.
I did, unexpectedly. I was at a local hobby shop, Mainline Hobby, out in PA, and I was looking for some track, and Butch actually brought a bundle up and said, "Oh, look at this, they have some Concrete Code 83." And then the owner of the shop shows up with about 9 more bundles. I'm like, okay, sold. So
yep, they found a home for those. So
exactly, yeah. So I've got enough to do, enough track to get all the way to Spokane now. So it's just a matter of collecting the rest of the material for a build and spree this fall.
So I see the big curve there. Now you've got that all set up and kind of elevated there as the big. Tell us about that area, because you got a guy standing there and it's really kind of a cool height because it gives that real what will be low perspective to somebody standing there looking at it.
Yeah, that part of the layout is called Providence Hill off the prototype.
Yeah,
it climbs at about 1.5% on the climb, and as it comes around as a curve, it's elevated. It's elevated 60 thousandths of an inch on that curve. It's a 39 inch outer radius, and the inner track is 36. Okay. So you're up close and personal. I think the elevation comes up to about 57 inches off the floor along that spline construction. So it's a really neat perspective, especially when you see those trains really leaning over. So it's kind of, you got to be all in on your equipment. If your equipment's not right, it's going to take it. It's going to take a fall, but we've, knock on wood, never have ever had it happen. So
well, there you go. And what a great perspective. Even when you're at the prototype, you don't usually that's how you're seeing them, and being able to do that on your layout and be able to have it at that almost eye level really brings home the realism. Yeah, it's a really neat spot. I knew it would be one of those spots, so that'll be probably the first place in the layout to get some scenery put on, which is, again, just a matter of logistics at this point, getting some time and material ready to go. Sort of like the real railroads, you have all your material staged before you actually get to work. Right. Yes, I see you got your, we're going through, I'm looking at the angle finder, and then, seeing the trains, you got some great pictures of them. One thing I can tell right away that you seem to have a real big passion for is the electronic side of things. You gave quite a bit on that. You talked about that. Does that, am I saying the right thing? Are you kind of one of those guys that that's one of the things you really enjoy about this hobby? I do. The electronics or wiring right now it's all 12 gauge bus. And for me, it has to be neat and orderly. If not, it'll become just a spaghetti ball of wires. Like I said, signaling will be put on the layout. As a matter of fact, the block detection is all installed, and the detectors are all installed as we speak, and they're all operational. So I knew there would be more wire to come in terms of cables and so forth to go in. So I needed to have the track wiring. Number one, the track needs to be bulletproof. It needs to be wired properly and easily maintained. So if it's not neat, then it's going to be very difficult to maintain. Well, I'm definitely seeing neat in the work that you're doing here. You've got bus lines that are color coded. You've got similar I'm sure one for each section of the layout, different colors, and everything's almost like you've taken a comb to it and really made everything nice and neat and orderly. That definitely shows in the work that you've got displayed here. Oh, thanks.
It's just if it's neat, it's probably going to work okay for you. And at least you're able to track down problems. If there's just by having a color-coded wiring, it makes things easier to track down issues.
Yeah, and for sure. And listen, there will be troubleshooting. I think I've seen a fair share of layouts and guys that have put a lot of work and heart and soul into doing their wiring, and there's still times where they've got to go back and they've got to troubleshoot this and make sure that they and when it's organized, when you have things written down and whatnot and information to go back to, it certainly makes things a lot less stressful when you're trying to find out why it's shorting in a certain area or your detection is off or whatever the issue is.
Right. I think some things I learned on different parts of the layout. Initially I would have a frame member in front of say that you had a yard, a flat area, there'd be a 1x4 flat frame member in front. Well, that really blocked my view into the bottom of the layout. So I removed all of those pieces. So now I have, basically very quick access to see every wire coming out the bottom of the wood or plywood. So it just makes it a little bit easier. Sometimes I think we overbuild things as model railroads. So it's strong, but at the same time, don't overbuild it if you don't have to. It's just wasted wood.
Sure. I think sometimes we're building, and I know I build and whatnot, almost like the prototype's going on it instead of lightweight rail cars and whatnot. You don't need that much reinforcement, but it's also good to build strong. You get somebody that leans on your layout or whatnot. You don't want it to have a failure, and you certainly have built it up really nice, also with some good strength.
Well, I think that was another thought I had when the top parts of the layout cantilever off the main I-joist construction, and there are some steel brackets back there. My thoughts were if somebody gets a little overexcited and leans really hard on the front of the layout, I don't want to be able to flip portions of it off. So Sure. It's all locked in with metal straps and so forth.
Sure. Yeah, and then of course the other thing, and it was actually the question I brought up to you because you had shown this control, and the control is for Pasco, the yard in Pasco, correct? That you were
yes, the little staging panel.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So you have this staging panel, and you talked about the inside and the guts, and and I'm sure that that's interesting. It certainly is interesting. I won't take away, but what set my eye to it was just your professional finish to it. So you've taken this panel and you've basically looked like something maybe BNSF would have in their control room somewhere. So tell us a little bit about that, because that was personally that was one of the neat things to me.
Oh, it's just the program I used was Affinity. It's sort of very similar to Adobe Illustrator.
Sure.
It's just way you can make something that's neat, number one, and good looking. You could print it out, make sure. What I did is I did it on Infinity, then I printed it out just on regular cardstock just to see how the switches would fit on it. And then once I had it set up right, the switches, I would put circles where the switches would actually be located, plus little drill points that would be engraved onto the metal. Once I finished with the Affinity, I sent it to a local engraving shop along with some metal. I bought some anodized aluminum I think the company's called Online Metals. Relatively inexpensive and pretty quick service. So they cut the order. So that's another problem, being able to cut metal on your own. I don't have access to a shear, so I have to rely on companies to cut. So I sent it out with the artwork to a local trophy engraver, and he put it on his laser and engraved it. What surprised me is when I sent it out, I thought it would go all the way down to the aluminum because it's just anodized coating on top. But it did go all the way through, which made it kind of a grayish-looking ghost letter, which I thought looked pretty cool.
Yeah, it looks super sharp, and I'll tell you, one thing that excites me when I see a layout is seeing how the finish is done. The scenery is important, track work is obviously important, and operations, but the presentation, and when you do things like this, it doesn't take a whole lot, and I'm sure not a ton of expense to get it to look great. It just sells. I mean, when somebody comes up and they see that, it looks like you may have stole a control from BNSF Railway and made it work for you. That's really a cool thing to me, at least. Whatnot.
Well, they're pretty simple to make. I mean, it's just a little bit of work. Just, again, be neat, take your time. Also, this is time. Take a little time and do it. Learn the program.
Right.
And, you can pretty much do that with any program you can come up with. You can even do that with just basic cardstock if you don't want to get laser engraved. Yeah. Just print it out and put it under a piece of plastic, and it'll look pretty good either way you do it. But the whole goal for that panel was, my dilemma was, I want to have staging, but I don't want the electronics to be on the sound engineers to be running while they're all sitting in staging.
Sure.
So the goal was to be able to turn the power off to the staging tracks. And I was able to do that using some 5-volt relays, which work out pretty well because I could tie those into the computer model road interface. Or you could just use them without. Either way, it'll work. But it was a simple solution to a problem.
Absolutely, and it really adds a kind of not only solves a problem, it just gives that interaction with the user. You've got the throttle obviously, but to be able to go over and throw toggle switches and have that kind of hands-on to the layout and whatnot, I think that makes it that much more enjoyable to operate and be a part of that layout as well.
Little tactile feel. I agree with you. I like being on touch switches and so forth versus a macro on a throttle. Yeah. Another thing I used on the staging area, which I borrowed from Colton Yard out in Colton, California. If you ever get out to Colton on Pepper Street, or Pepper Avenue, you can look at the tracks. The yard tracks have blue maintenance lights that light up in the center of the track. And that would be a neat thing to have on the layout. So the way I have it set up now is, if you turn the power off to that track, a blue maintenance light comes on, just to say, hey, that track is off, So just something different.
Yeah, it's kind of like the blue flagging that track, right? To have that blue
light
on there, yeah.
Exactly. And I think in the presentation, if you see I sent that one picture of Colton Yard. It was something different. It kind of struck me.
You also had this, and then maybe, it kind of went by me. I'm looking at more of your wiring stuff here. You've just done a really phenomenal job of keeping things clean and organized. It's just really wild. But you also had this these devices in a basically a toolbox that you were able to port around. Tell me a little bit about what you got going there.
Those are Bruce Chubb's S mini cards, a computer model railroad interface.
Okay.
A bunch of years ago, I was doing Fremo layouts when I lived in Texas, and I had a module set that was modeled after Black Texas, which is at one point was just a simple pass inside, but now it's grown to double track with a pass inside. It was a pretty neat area. Well, I wanted full CTC signaling on it, so I built a little CTC machine that replicated an old Union Switch's signal, and I hooked up a computer interface to it to run the signals. So it was fully operational. I needed a way to carry them, so I put everything modular into these toolboxes. Yep. So it's a good way to keep this stuff all together and keep it protected at the same time. Yeah, the parts actually come out if you need them.
And we'll definitely have to share the pictures of that. It's just pretty wild, and you've done such a clean, organized job. All the wires are all in the same color and bundled, and yeah, you've definitely taken it to the next level when it comes to keeping your wiring organized. That's for sure.
Again, with the computer interface, if you don't, you're just asking for trouble. So it's easy to do. If you're out of position by just a few screws, or nothing's going to work right.
Right.
So,
right.
And actually, I had a problem when I first hooked that up for the first time on that module set. It's about everything always happens at 1 a.m. and it wasn't working properly. But the nice thing about it is exactly where it is in the program. Hey, why isn't that working? And I looked over and said, oh, I'm hooked up to the wrong screw. It was simple as that. So the computer model road interface, again, that's Bruce Chubb's system. If anybody is out there interested in signaling, I would push them in that direction. Okay. And the one thing nice about it doesn't require much. The learning curve is steep initially, but that's what anything electronic, whether it's programming DCC decoders and so forth. The one thing that's nice about it is you have total control over it. And once you figure it out, you'll just expand it more and more and more to do pretty much anything you want it to do. It's really a nice system. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, that seems to be like your driving passion. I see that then the next page, you've got some code that you've written. It's kind of like basic programming language. So
that's I'm not a computer guy, believe it or not, but it's just it's a Microsoft Quick Basic, which is a dead language. I'm trying to think the last version of it, probably in the 90s.
Sure.
But you can still use it.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, I always get sidetracked in these projects, and I wanted to have a computer that was dedicated just to the railroad, but without Windows.
Right.
So I went out and found an old computer at a computer shop. The guy was scrapping it. He's like, take it. I'm like, okay. So it was just would boot the BIOS and managed to load DOS into it, from old days, and loaded Quick Basic, and I had it running one of those CMRI cards the other day. It was working out real nice.
Nice.
So for a matter of maybe $30, got a full up computer for the railroad. So it's a nice deal.
Yeah, sometimes simpler is better when it comes to that stuff too, and it's just simple. It's focused to doing just that task. You don't
Exactly.
need a whole lot.
There are a lot of different options nowadays for that. I mean, there's Arduinos and Raspberry Pi if you're into microelectronics. But I still think the Chubb system is better just due to how much documentation is available. You don't have to really think very hard. You just look it up in a book, cut and paste, and there you go. It's there.
Right.
And he has literally hundreds of pages of how do you do this or how do you do that. So if you want to do signaling, that's the way to go, at least in my opinion.
So what do you have? We talked about what kind of trains you're looking to run and whatnot. Have you thought about what kind of system you're going to use for your operations? Are you switch lists or car cards, waybills, or is it going to be dispatch? What's your plan for operations that way?
I think we're going to have a dispatcher for signaling. I'm not sure if we're going to have waybills or switch lists. I'm not sure. Haven't gotten that far yet. I'm open to anything at this point.
Sure.
Whatever's easier to put together.
It's a funny that I think maybe switch lists are in your future because you talk about if you're able to program and you're able to be able to do those things. There's some really great switch list programs that are out there, and we've had guests on here talking about some of those. Car cards and waybills are pretty straightforward, but if you're able to manipulate some software and make things work your way, I think switch lists will be in your way. It'll be interesting to see which way you come up as you head towards the operations part of your layout. What do you think? I know you've run into some recent struggles with getting materials and stuff. What kind of goal do you have in your head to be operational? Do you have like a point that you've said, okay, I want to be operational by a certain point, or hoping to at least?
I'd like to get at least the layout built through to Spokane area. Maybe not finished, but at least have the trackage out there. So like I said, the extension right now is in the works for this fall. The initial problem was trackage, just finding track. I use microengineering code 83, concrete ties for the main. So now I have enough of that to get to the Spokane, and then also lumber prices went through the roof. And then, that's apparent with everything nowadays. Everything was just went sky high. But sure. I think we're going to do a building blitz this fall in terms of bench work. There's a long wall. I have this 40-foot long wall along the basement that's going to be set up just for Spokane. So the plans are in the works for that as we speak. Excellent. So once we get there, I think we'll start doing some operating,
Throughout, so even to the point that you're at now, what would you say to a new model railroader or somebody that's gotten a space that's similar or maybe smaller or slightly bigger, and they're like, I know I want to build something, but I'm still they're in that beginning phase. What would be your biggest piece of advice to them as they start to put plans together?
Maybe start small in terms of. Again, what's their experience level? Have they built anything before? Start small, because I know for me, and like everybody else, I think we always tend to over-engineer it. We spend a lot of time, armchair modeling and so forth. Maybe build something, figure out what you like and what you don't like. Go visit friends. I mean, that's the one thing I like to do when I go to visit layouts is I don't want to see the top of the layout. I want to look underneath,
sure.
And I don't want to reinvent the wheel. So read up, but at one point you got to make a decision and actually just do something. And sometimes you make a mistake. Who cares? It's all part of the hobby.
Sure.
Things are going to go right. Things are going to go wrong. Things you're going to really like, and you'll replicate those. For instance, me, and I said it during the presentation, was the spline road bed. I used the masonite spline. the results came out pretty good. I like it, but it's just very time consuming to put it all together. So I think in future parts of the layout, I won't use the spline. I'll just use plain old 3/4 inch plywood and cookie cutter it if I have to. So just start small, but just keep on going. Just go down there, every few days and do one thing. Even if you do 15 minutes worth of work every day, it'll keep you motivated, right? I think the biggest thing that motivated me was actually getting some trains running when I was actually able to switch Connell. That was a pretty big motivator, because it becomes drudgery when you're just working. And nothing's running.
Yeah, I think you got to have some gratification, right? You got to have some kind of, some showing results a little at a time, and being able to run a train, even if it's just doing a little bit of switching, definitely helps keep you motivated, keeps you heading towards that goal of completing, track work and then eventually scenery and so on. So
I think for me, I built the one major peninsula at first. I think if I were to do it over again, I would do staging first. I would build a staging yard. This way, that staging yard could feed anything that I would have built in terms of operation.
Sure.
And you could operate sooner and have trains running sooner.
Absolutely.
So that's what I would change if I were to do it over again.
Awesome. Well, Dave, we're going to wrap it up here, and appreciate you coming on the show. Looking forward to seeing what you complete here. You've got a fantastic area that you're going to model. You've got the scenery that on the prototype is phenomenal. I'm just excited to see what you take from the prototype and apply it to your layout and what it's going to look like. So we'll definitely get you back on the show with some more updates as you move along. And we'll all hope for some lower lumber prices. We'll hope that things start to get a little bit better on the supply chain side, so you can get right after it.
Well, I think we're going to do it no matter what. So we're going to just jump into it head first and get work done this fall. So, but look forward to seeing you again at the next meet, right? Hopefully see you maybe down in Maryland at the Mid-Atlantic meet. If not, we'll see you up in Springfield in January for the big show.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. You'll find more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Learn more about the show and check out past and future episodes on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks again for hanging out with us around the layout.